Good morning to all our friends and family, pediatricians and practice managers and others in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia region. And welcome to our 23rd annual Business of Pediatrics session. A little different this time. We're doing things virtually. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the day. Today's session is hosted by our Pediatric Health Network, our clinically integrated network focused on children and pediatricians and those who take care of them. Next. The PHN, our Pediatric Health Network, has moved beyond the triple aim to the quadruple aim, improving the quality of care, patient satisfaction, and managing costs while demonstrating value. But the fourth element of the quadruple aim is elevating provider and care team experience, which is actually focused not on patient wellness, but on wellness for us as providers and practice managers and members of the care team. And we try to walk the talk. So this morning's kickoff session is a session on focused on that fourth aim. And it's my pleasure to introduce Jenny Piela-Timmons, who is going to provide a session on self-care. And self-care isn't selfish. And Jenny is a teacher of yoga and meditation and has worked with several of our staff and is here to sort of get us off to a calm and inspirational start. So Jenny, take it.
Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as we get into our presentation here today. So as stated, our topic for this first session here is self-care isn't selfish. We're going to talk a little bit about using stress management techniques to help you perform your best. So to start off, I'm going to start with the first order of business, and that is you. I want you to take a moment and humor me, maybe close your eyes, sit back, take a deep breath in and out. And I'm going to ask you about this scale of 1 to 10. Now, we're probably very familiar with this 1 to 10 scale, but we're going to apply this to our stress levels here this morning. So I'm just trying to gauge a temperature of where we are with how we feel in this moment. So 1 is you do not feel any stress at all. You're relaxed, you're okay, there's nothing hitting you hard. 10 on that scale is, you know what, my plate is full. I might even be at a breaking point. I need a break. So we have that scale. And I'd like you to just take a moment right now, look internally for a second, take a deep breath in and out, and pick a number on that 1 to 10 scale. So the poll is coming up and you should be able to do that. And what we'll do is we'll take a snapshot and kind of see where we are in the beginning of this session. And then we're going to revisit it at the end after we do a couple practical applications and techniques. And as we start to go through this, there's a couple things that I like to mention. Now, what I find here often is that, especially in a professional setting, many are very maybe hesitant to acknowledge that they are feeling stress or say that they are feeling stress for fear of making it appear that you're incapable or possibly unable to complete your work. On a personal level, some people feel that same way. I don't want to admit that I feel stressed because we get what we call a case of the shoulds. I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't feel the stress that's hitting me. And so with that, what I encourage you to do today is understand that this is your space. This poll is coming up. It's anonymous. It's simply for your use. We're going to look at the aggregate information, obviously, but what we want to do is just understand that there's this potential for us to check in with ourselves. And that is so important because if we don't know where we're starting, we don't know where to go when it comes to our own personal care and wellness. So hopefully we're able to get that poll completed. Let's look at some of the results here. So what we see here, and this is pretty normal, but we see a large majority around a 7. And I will say when I've worked with groups and we do this poll, this is a very common poll that I'll do. When I work with groups, we usually see that sprinkling around 7 or 8, 6, 7, or 8 is our more common one. But we see a pretty wide range around where our stress levels are today. And I think, again, that is just information that we're bringing into our own knowledge so that we can understand where we're starting from. And then we'll go ahead and kind of work forward from there. So I'd like to provide a roadmap of what we're going to do with our time together here this morning. I do want to talk about self-care, and I want to maybe debunk some of the ideas of what we think self-care is, talk a little bit more about redefining it. But then we're going to pull out from this concept of self-care stress management, which is the element of taking care of ourselves. And we're going to apply some simple techniques in stress management that hopefully you can take with you, use both at home, in the workplace, even with patients as ways to help mitigate stress and help feel a little bit better. So from here, how we define the elements of our life decides how much time and importance they are allowed. I like to start with this statement because it's a reality check. If we choose that our own care is less important than anything else, if we define it as a low priority, if we define it as something that isn't the first thing that we need to attend to, then that decides how much time it's allotted. It decides how much importance it is given in our own lives. So that is our kind of reality check of it all starts with the definition and how we define certain elements of our own care and well-being. And that's where self-care kind of gets a bad rap. So I like to start off with just some common thoughts about maybe what's out there about self-care. And so we have up here, self-care is sometimes considered by some a luxury. Many people, when I say self-care, the first thing they think of is like the massage, or I'm going to go have a spa day. And that's such a luxury. Many treat it as a reward. I've had a long week, so I'm going to spend Friday night, vegged out, and I'm going to relax. And that's my reward for a long, hard week. A treat even, again, I'm going to go ahead and treat myself after months of vigorous work. I'm gonna allow myself to have a vacation. It's my treat, right? A few view it as indulgent. Why do you get massages on a regular basis, or why do you exercise on a regular basis when there's so many other things that need to have, be having happen, or selfish even. That's why we titled the subject of this session is self-care isn't selfish. It is thought by many that it is kind of this misleading idea that it's taking care of ourselves suddenly becomes something that's a faux pas. It's something that we shouldn't do. And we really need to possibly look at redefining our view of that. Many believe self-care equates to pampering, which again has underlying implications that it's a luxury, or that it's, maybe in the gender realm, maybe self-care is thought of as more as like a female approach. You're going to get pampered and that's your self-care. Whereas, we need it across the board. We need it to be kind of this non-gender bias and know that every person does deserve and absolutely need some self-care. It's often viewed as low priority, right? Everybody else comes first. Everything else comes first. Now, in this business, not only personally, I would venture to guess, not only personally, but also professionally, you are caregivers. That is your personality. That is your profession. Unfortunately, that is also the group that probably fails the most at self-care, because we give to everyone else, but fail to give back to ourselves. So this is kind of your permission. This session is talking about creating that permission and that allowance that you are important, and it is time to take care of yourself as well as the others around you. And then a couple other thoughts here on self-care that are often, again, misunderstood, that we think that self-care is once in a while. We do it every now and then. I always joke around, maybe you meditated on Monday for 5 minutes and now it's Wednesday and you're wondering why you're not in bed. Why am I not relaxed? Why am I so stressed out? I meditated on Monday. It is a constant and daily practice. self-care is. So we'll again redefine it. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but it's important to know that 1 or 2 times every few weeks isn't necessarily what self-care is defined as. And then lastly, some common thoughts. It's kind of a buzzword right now. It's a little bit trendy to talk about self-care, and for better or worse, it gets it visible and it gets us talking about self-care. But the perception is that when it becomes a buzzword like that, it almost becomes background noise, and the importance of it is lost in that noise. So self-care has been around all time, and it will continue to be around, whether it's trendy or not trendy. It's something that is absolutely important to our survival. So these are the things that are common thoughts. And, again, I go back to that first statement that I shared. The way we define self-care is going to decide how much time and importance we place on it. So if we can reframe how we define it and look at some of the realities of self-care, first reality that I'll share is that self-care is a fundamental need. We talk about think about the first time you're a parent, or you're raising a child, or you're caring for a child. We care for all the needs of that child in an effort to allow that child to grow healthy and resilient, to thrive, until it gets to the point where the child can start to grow and create their own self-care tactics, and they're able to identify their own needs and meet those needs. And then eventually we become adults and we identify our needs and we meet our needs. But somewhere along the way, those identification of our needs and meeting our needs in terms of self-care gets a little bit blurry and maybe pushed off to the side as other things become perceived more important. Self-care is a fundamental need. Just as we raise a child to be healthy and resilient, we raise ourselves to be healthy and resilient. It is critical to our emotional, physical, and mental well-being. Like I said, it is a daily practice. So it is something that we practice and put attention to on a regular basis. Non-negotiable. I always think about, the tactics that you'll hear of, you schedule the time with yourself. When you are meeting the needs of everybody else and you're a caregiver and you have a heavy workload and you have family life at home, it is important to schedule your own time as well and make that time non-negotiable. And those are some strict boundaries that are difficult to uphold at times, but so important. So we start to, again, reframe and redefine what self-care is and make it a priority. Self-care can be small, manageable actions. It doesn't have to be these grand gestures of a large vacation that I go and I fly off to an island. It can be small things that we do throughout the day, very manageable. It's not like adding things to our plate. It's in effect giving ourselves a little bit more energy and space to take on more. Self-care is also specific to the individual and to the moment. So what I mean by this is oftentimes we'll look at this idea of what I should do for self-care. Somebody said that yoga is great for them and it helps manage their stress and it helps kind of, look at all the different things, body and mind, and meet those needs for self-care. But if I don't like yoga, that's not going to be self-care for me. That's actually going to be quite stressful. So there's resistance to some of these ideas of self-care. And if you find yourself having resistance to it, that's not your self-care. You define self-care specifically to you and what feels good, what helps you regain energy and a feeling of well-being, and that's your self-care. Now, in the moment, it will change. If you're having a high stress level, if you're having a low stress level, self-care will look different in those moments. So being a little bit flexible in our definition of it as well. And this next one, I should have put an asterisk next to it because I think for a group of caregivers, this is necessary. It is necessary to give ourselves care, to practice self-care in order to give energy to others. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You've probably heard that, but I will repeat it over and over again. If you are not caring for yourself, your energy is being drained. You are not going to be your best. You're not going to be performing your best for others if you are not feeling and giving care to yourself. if you're not feeling well, or giving care to yourself. So we definitely need to keep that in front of mind. If you're having resistance to this idea of self-care, if it just seems like another thing to put on your list, or if it feels like you're going through the motions of it, remind yourself of the need for this, so that you are, if giving care to others is your main priority, this is going to help that. This is going to support that. So care for yourself so that you can care for others. And then lastly, and this isn't all inclusive, there's lots of things, other ways to reframe self-care, but the last mention I want to make is that self-care isn't always enjoyable. Again, we kind of have these misinformed ideas that self-care is that massage or spa day, or that it's something, a luxury that we treat ourselves to. But sometimes self-care is tough. It's the setting boundaries. It's the removing ourselves from toxic relationships. It's things like that can be those tough conversations, but in an effort to provide some sanity and some space and some peace for our own well-being. So again, reframing. So now that we've reframed it, let's talk about maybe how we can define it with that reframe. So self-care is the practice of taking care of one's own physical, emotional, and mental needs in an effort to remain healthy and resilient. So that's what we're here to do, right? We want to look at self-care in a way that allows us to be thriving and allows us to do all the things that we want to do for others. What it can look like. So, I talk about all this self-care and all this, it's kind of a big word, but here's just a list of some things that are, some examples of what self-care can look like. One, eating when you're hungry. I know that sounds so simple, and you probably kind of laugh like, that's self-care. But that is, again, going back to the example of the child, when the infant is born, we feed them when they're hungry because that's a need that they have, and we want that child to thrive and be healthy. We have those same needs too. So it can be as simple as that. We live in a kind of a diet culture, for lack of better terms, and sometimes we get wrapped up in things that aren't exactly healthy. We look at, these ideas of health in maybe misshaped ways. We have to remind ourselves that we eat when we're hungry because we're fueling our bodies, right? Sleeping when we're tired. We may all be a little bit guilty of that. It's that whole quote that humans are actually the only being that delays sleep. Everybody else sleeps when they're tired, but we need to sleep too. We need rest. It can look like setting and holding healthy boundaries, and that's a difficult self-care technique, but that is definitely one. Letting go, like I mentioned, of toxic relationships, finding balance in work and life, and that's a hard balance to strike, especially in your profession, but looking at how best that looks for you. Showing self-compassion is an element of self-care, giving yourself grace and forgiveness, allowing yourself room for growth and understanding as we move forward. Managing stress in healthy ways, and that's going to be something that we pull out here in a second and talk a little bit more. Expressing emotions in productive ways, exercising, following a passion, having those hobbies. It can be connecting with others in one way or another. Right now, we are very much knee deep in a pandemic, right? And so connection has been difficult. So finding unique ways to connect with others and doing what you can. But these are it's just a small example of things that can be self-care, and maybe helping define it a little bit more for you and what that means. So looking at ways that you can continue to increase your well-being and take care of yourself. So for the remainder of our time now, what I'd like to do is pull out the managing stress in healthy ways element of self-care. So self-care is obviously a variety of physical, emotional, mental well-being needs. When we look at stress is a huge one that hits us hard, and it can affect all these different elements of our health. So when we're looking at self-care and understanding this, I'd like to introduce this flow of ideas. So this is not unlike what you do every day. We identify, we understand, and we apply. So it's this flow of checking in with ourselves, identifying what's going on, understanding in that moment what my options are, and then applying those options. So every day, we identify perhaps there's a diagnosis, we understand what we can do to treat it, and then we apply, right? So this flow is very probably familiar to you, but we're going to apply it internally to what we're going on. So, or what's going on within us. So let's make it a little bit more practical here. In this example of stress management, know and identify. I want to know and identify what stress feels like for me. How does it feel in my body? And this is one of the first steps of self-care, is understanding and checking in. So we say, maybe stress for me is the insomnia that pops up at night. Maybe it's the tightness in my chest or the soreness in my shoulders. Maybe it's the headache that I'm getting every afternoon. Maybe it's the deep breath that I take and I can't let it all go. So understanding what are those triggers. And I really think that all too often we fail to understand ourselves and take in all of that information that our body's giving us. But stress will give us many, many signals. It's just our choice to understand or at least recognize them. So that's your first step in this process of taking care of our stress and kind of applying this technique and this first tool. Know and identify what stress feels like for me. Second, then I understand in this moment, what can I do? Is there something changeable about the stress that's hitting me, or is it something that I have no control over? And in that moment, can I change any part of that? Can I change how I'm thinking about the stress? Can I change how I'm feeling about the stress? And sometimes it does take a lot of self-awareness and moment of internal reflection to be able to do that. But it's powerful once we get a handle of that. Once we understand what's happening and don't just let the stress be this background tension, we can start to apply different techniques and understand how we can change that feeling. And that's where application comes in then. We practice our self-care. We start to apply some stress management techniques in this element, or in this example, and we start to understand how we can feel better. So identify, understand, apply. It can be applied to any part of our self-care. Now, when we looked at apply, that's probably where the question comes in. So what do I do? I'm feeling stress. I'm feeling that tension, or maybe I just got really short with my family at home because I can feel the stress and I didn't have the patience to answer a question, right? And so I understand for a moment I'm feeling that stress. In that moment, what can I do? I can step away for a second and I can apply a stress management technique. So what is a stress management technique that I could apply in that moment? That's what we're going to talk about here. I want to give you a practical application before we leave today. And this practical application is breath work. So breath work, again, can be a word that means a really, to some it's a little bit esoteric, or it could be a little bit like on edge of maybe what we're not comfortable or familiar with. But the power of our breath, when we start to look at this, I'll tell you from a yoga background, what we talk about is kind of the 3 rhythms of the body. And we have the breath rhythm, how quickly I'm breathing in and out. I have the thought rhythm, so how clouded or chaotic my thoughts are in my mind at any given moment. And then I have the heart rhythm, so how quickly or slowly my heart is beating. And that kind of alludes to the relaxed physical state of my body or the tense physical state of my body. Now, these 3 rhythms, my heart, my breath, and my mind, or my thought rhythm, are so intertwined that as one elevates, the rest elevate. So as I start to get tense and I feel the stress, my heart rate will go up, my breathing pattern, my breathing will start to quicken, and then my mind becomes a little bit chaotic, a little bit clouded. That's not when I'm thinking my clearest or my sharpest. So what I want to look at is trying to keep those rhythms a little bit down. Out of the 3, the only one I can control is how quickly or slowly I'm breathing, and that's where breath work comes in. When I start to manage my breath and pay attention to my breath, it can trigger our bodies and our minds to start to slow down and relax as well. My body can start to feel that sensation as the breath slows, the heart rate slows. It's triggered into my body to kind of physically relax. And then as my physical body relaxes, my mind starts to kind of become a little bit easier to manage as well. So let's do a practice here. The practice that I'm going to give you today our counted breath technique. So this is one I use with kids, I use with adults, I use personally, but this is a very, very popular one when we look at counted breath. And when I say counted breath, essentially what we're looking at, we'll break it down to the fundamentals. The fundamentals of breath, we have an inhale, the breath goes into the body. We have an exhale, the breath goes out, right? Very simple. Now, when we apply the counted breath technique, what we're doing is in our own minds, we are counting how long it takes on the inhale, how long it takes on the exhale. So we add a number to that breath to decide the length of the breath, and that helps give us a little bit of an anchor, a little bit of a kind of a framework to work at rather than just breathing, right? It can give us a little bit more of a manipulation of our breath to help with this sensation. So triangle breath is what we're looking at here. And you can see on the screen, if we start at the bottom where the star is, we can inhale for 3 counts. And that can be a deep, slow inhale, 1, 2, 3. We hold our breath or retain our breath for 3 counts. And then we exhale for 3 counts. And then we begin again. And we take our time going through this pattern, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, as we start to notice how our body responds. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and invite you to practice it with me, closing your eyes, relaxing back if that's safe to do so. And just for the first moment here, pay attention to your breath. Notice how it comes in through the nose and then back out again. And you can notice the depth of the breath, the sound of it, maybe even the feel of it as it comes into the body. Perhaps the chest lifts and the shoulders open. And as it goes out, the belly kind of falls down, the chest relaxes. And we'll start to apply this technique to our breath. So on your next inhale, in your mind, I'll have you take 3 seconds to draw that breath in. And once the breath is in, we hold it for 3. And then release it nice and slow, 3 counts. And continue this pattern again. We'll do a couple more cycles to feel how it feels in our body and how the response is. So again, inhale 3 counts. We'll hold it. And then we exhale. It's equal counts all around. Let's take one more time to go through the cycle. And then we can come out of that by coming just to a natural breath in and out. You can allow the eyes to open back up if they're not already. And just take a moment to check in, see how you feel with how that made your body feel. Now, a couple things that I will mention is sometimes when we first introduce breath work, if you're not familiar with it, manipulating something so automatic like your breath can be a little bit anxiety inducing. It can feel like maybe we're hyperventilating or we can't get a full breath. If you find yourself feeling awkward with it, what I would encourage you to do is just come back to simply noticing the breath. You don't have to add an account to it or start to manipulate the change in how long or deep the breath in and out is. But simply noticing it will give you some kind of these sensations as well. So triangle breath, that's your first one to take with you today. The second one that I'll give you is another counted breath, and this is just a simple inhale for 4 counts, and then a long exhale. There's no holding of the breath. There's no retention of the breath. It's a simple deep breath in for 4 counts, and then a long exhale for 8. So with this, I will encourage you again. Let's go ahead and try it. If you're up for it, close the eyes, sit back and relax the shoulders. Begin by simply just noticing the breath. It's a deep inhale through the nose and then back out through the nose if possible. And then we'll begin to apply our count to it. So again, a 4 count breath in. So it'll be a short, deep breath. And then a slow exhale. Anywhere from 6 to 8 counts, allow that breath to go out. And then we'll do it again. Let's go ahead and do a couple more rounds of it. And then coming back to just noticing our breath, inhale and exhale. Natural breathing, no manipulation or changing the breath. Allow it to be just your basic inhale and exhale. And then when you're ready, you can allow the eyes to open back up if they're not already. So with the counted breaths, we did the inhale of 4 counts, the exhale of 8 counts. That's a shorter inhale, a longer exhale. By rule of thumb, if the inhale is shorter than the exhale, we have a relaxing breath. If it's inverse, if we have a long, deep breath in and a short, a little bit more forceful exhale out, that can be an energizing breath. So one of the takeaways from today's session, I'm going to, I believe they're going to post on the website here after the day is over, is a breathwork card with different patterns. So you can play around with these patterns, and different patterns will kind of stimulate different feelings within our body. And if you think about it, it's pretty natural. Like what we just did here, deep breath in and then a long drawn out exhale is like the sigh that we give, right? When we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. That's a very natural way. And we're just applying a little bit of a framework for it so that we can use it as a technique, technique to make us physically feel better in the moment when stress is hitting hard. So hopefully you all are still awake. But so we did a couple breathing techniques. We talked about all the redefinition of self-care. And I hope we're maybe cracking open just a little bit more potential here of what we can do for taking care of ourselves first. I know our number one priority is to be out there and giving care to others. And we have that, and we're so thankful for people like that. But we also have to keep care for ourselves, and hopefully we're looking, as we've gone through this conversation this morning, considering the importance of this for you and understanding where we are. So we're going to end today as we began. 1 to 10 scale. Again, let's check in on how we feel with our stress after doing a couple breathwork techniques, after listening in on some self-care. And we'll keep that poll up, and that poll is going to be available. Again, 1 is you're not feeling any stress at all. 10 being, oh, I'm overwhelmed. I need a break. And then find yourself somewhere on that poll. I'll give you a moment to go ahead and answer that as I just share a couple of the things that you'll have for takeaways. As I mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and send on the breathwork guide, but I also want to pass along a kids yoga workbook. I know that many of us are working with, families and kids, and during this time, there's some things going on that are challenging for getting kids active. So I want to put this in your hands. It's a workbook that we put out. It's 31 days of kids yoga poses, and then it also has a journal entry prompt in it to encourage conversation between parent and child, or adult, caregiver, and child. And it's just really kind of a fun way to introduce yoga to the family and to kids and get them active. And then lastly, I'm also going to pass along just our pack of affirmation card printables. That's just positive mindset. And, we didn't get into that too much today, but it can be very powerful. We use that again with our families and kids, and then it has a powerful impact on our adults as well. So hopefully we can see what that poll is looking like here. Well, look at this. Okay, so when we first started, our primary number that was coming at, or the highest average, was a 7 on that scale of 1 to 10, and we have bumped it down to a 4. I know that doesn't say everything, but that says something. So hopefully we did feel just how important it is to kind of take a moment for ourselves, prepare, and now you are energized and ready to go to take on the rest of the day, and everything that comes along with it as you go through this seminar today. So questions, comments, discussion, I was just going to put up all my information there. If you have anything that you need from me, any comments, any questions, or want to have a conversation, I'm here. I'm more than willing to talk through all this stuff. And thanks for all the work that you're doing. And take care of yourself, okay?
Thanks, Jenny, for an excellent presentation and a wonderful, calming start to today's Business of Pediatrics. I feel so relaxed.
Good.
And I'm sure the over 100 folks that have already logged in for the morning session are feeling that way as well. Just so folks know, we are recording the sessions and making them available. So if you want to share Jenny's presentation and approach to helping to manage our stress with others in your family or work family, you should be able to find it once we have the presentations up on the Pediatric Health Network website. Taylor, where are we with time? You right on?
Yeah, we have about a minute. I know there was one question. Jen, if you would like to answer this, someone sent in, how can we find self-care that is not expensive? I don't like exercising, yoga, and I have no other hobbies other than medicine.
Yeah. Well, I think hopefully we got through some of those things in part of the presentation today, but kind of redefining what self-care is. It doesn't have to be this luxury or pampering or expense. It can be simply kind of reframing how we think about taking care of ourselves. And it could be the breath work that we did, right? You know, if that resonated, if that worked, that's obviously there's no expense there. You have all the tools you need, and it can be simply a few seconds here and there that's practice. But self-care doesn't have to be what we have always been told it is. You know, I think we've been told that it's this very expensive yoga membership or this very expensive spa day or this vacation, things like that. Just a reminder that self-care can be simply meeting our needs. And that's at its fundamental level what it is. And once we reach that level, I think we'll start to understand that maybe there's so many opportunities there that are not expensive and not time consuming, but simply taking care of ourselves. It could be, you know, your favorite, you know, you're connecting to your friend that makes you feel good, you know, having a connection to someone else, having a conversation with a friend that you know, after you leave that conversation, you always feel better. That's self-care, because that social connection, that human connection is a fundamental need as well. So it's about just kind of maybe broadening our definition, and hopefully that helps for that listener that asked, because we don't need to, you know, we don't need to spend a whole lot of money on it. We just need to spend effort and time.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen.
Of course.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Great start. And with that, I think we're going to transition. Correct, Taylor? So just a reminder, you know, this is our 23rd year. We began as Children's National Health Network, and today we are Pediatric Health Network, a clinically integrated network, bringing together all of us who are taking care of kids for better care, better coordination, better value. And the PHN is sponsoring the meeting. There are no other external sources of funding. We get feedback from our membership about content, and we really appreciate your participation and support all these years and going forward. This is a shot of last year's Business of Pediatrics. What a difference a year makes. We definitely are not doing business as usual these days. It will inform many of our presentations. It is my sincere hope that we can gather this way next year, and that as a community, as a country, we can get our arms around this pandemic and return a little bit more to business as usual. I think there are real advantages about doing some of these things virtually, no travel, no parking, but we're a special club, Pediatric Practices, and it really helps once or twice a year for us to gather and meet our friends and colleagues, and we look forward to doing this again. We are able to offer CME credit for most of today's presentations, up to 3.5 hours through GW. Next. You can go to the GWU cloud-cme.com website, log in with your username and password, and evaluate the presentations as well as document CME participation, and at some future point produce CME reports. Next. You click on My CME, and that actually, you can see the presentation slides there, although we will be posting these on our PHN website. Next. Over the years, a few of you have forgotten your username or password, or changed them, or had some confusion. Donita Pickett, who has been with us all these years, is sort of the queen of helping sort out CME and registration and data. And if you're having any issues or challenges, reach out to Donita at dpickett@childrensnational.org, and she can continue to help you and get you all tucked in. Legal disclaimers. The Pediatric Health Network sponsors this meeting for the education and benefit of our members and guests. Coding and practice guidelines are provided by national and local experts. They are not specific recommendations by Pediatric Health Network or Children's National Hospital. I said it. We always have to follow CMS and CPT coding guidelines, track your EOBs, and share and learn from your colleagues. Thanks. Notes about today's conference. All the lines are muted through the presentation. We don't use the chat box. We actually use the Q&A, the question and answer box, to ask questions or make comments. We are recording the sessions, and in a day or so, they will be posted on the PHN website, pediatrichealthnetwork.org. We appreciate your participation. We welcome questions, suggestions, and comments. Due to time constraints, we may not be able to get to all of them, but we will definitely try to circle back and get you the information that you're asking. The session goes up through about 12:30. We have scheduled 2 10-minute breaks at 9:50 and 10:50 as per the morning presentation. Take some time to take care of yourself, take a break, make sure you stand up and stretch, get any fuel your body needs, but we're going to try to stay close to schedule. Thanks. We have CME learning objectives. They're there on the website. Next. And here's today's agenda. We'll be hearing from our local AAP chapters momentarily, and then actually we have a great program. Chip's going to talk about where we've been and where we're going with the pandemic. There are big E&M coding changes coming for 2021. They keep changing the guidelines on back to school. Nathaniel Beers will chat about that. We have a panel talking about telemedicine. Not so much where we've been, but what's telemedicine going to look like after all the pandemic is over. And rumor has it there was a small election a couple weeks ago, and we're going to have some analysis by Dr. Lee Beers and Tanya Kinlow on election impact as it affects pediatricians and kids. So thanks to our presenters. You will be meeting them over the course of the morning. Thanks, Taylor, for keeping the slides up with me. Here's our telemedicine panel. Ed Fox, Tiffany Meyer, and Patricia Kapunen. And we are about to transition, I believe, to getting some quick updates from our local AAP chapters in Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. All of our presenters have completed faculty disclosures. We are here to share information. No one has any business interests that they are actually moving forward or recommending as part of today's presentation. pretty straightforward today. Next slide. How about that? I finished ahead of schedule. Will wonders never cease? It must be I'm so calm this morning. We did want to carve out a little bit of space for our local AAP chapters to just sort of share with our audience, which really encompasses Maryland, DC, and Northern Virginia. The American Academy of Pediatrics and the local chapters have been out there doing work advocating for pediatricians forever. And many of us are both national members and local chapter members, but not everybody. I can't overstate how important, significant, and wonderful the work has been of the local chapters over the course of these last couple months with the pandemic in terms of representing the interests of pediatricians in their community and with the states and the folks who are sort of trying to identify resources and rules, and it has just made all the difference in the world. And if you haven't been supporting your local chapter by being an active member, we really encourage you to do that. And as an example, we have invited Drs. Martin, Jarvis, and Dodge to just provide some quick updates about some of the work that the local chapters have been doing. So Rachel, I think we're starting with you.
Okay, I think we're good. Are we good now? Yeah. So good morning, everyone. So the Maryland chapter, thank you for inviting us. So I am here on behalf of our president, who's Debbie Badawi, our vice president or president-elect, Monique Soleil-Burke, and our past president, Maria Brown. We are a large chapter, so we have 650 plus members. We kind of bounce around that number. And our mission is to support and encourage pediatricians in the promotion of optimal health for all Maryland's children and adolescents. That is our website. And thank you, Dr. Weissman. Please do join the local chapter. That's how we are able to do all this great work that I'm going to tell you about. So as I'm sure all of the chapters have been doing, we've been really working hard to stay on top of the COVID-19 response. In the beginning, we had meetings weekly where we kind of allowed for a sounding board for our private practice pediatricians to kind of talk about how they were doing practice transformation, to kind of support each other and share ideas locally. We talked about PPE availability. Then most recently, we've met again, and we actually heard from we're very fortunate to have some great people locally. And so we heard from Drs. Jeff Rosenthal and Drs. Yvette Rooks, who are really some people working at the front lines on athletes and what to do after athletes have been exposed to COVID. So we talked about cardiac clearance, which was really wonderful. And then I have to give a huge shout out for our Maryland Pediatric Council. They have been working tirelessly this whole time in really advocating with state leaders. Our entire leadership team has met with state leaders frequently to really make sure that telehealth, codes were being reimbursed, that we could give clear messages on things to our members. And so that has been really wonderful. We've also recently did a survey of our members so that we could kind of have some data about testing capacity. And we found out that only 45% of our respondents reported actually doing PCR testing. And then only 20% were doing in-house point of care testing. And really the challenges were testing materials, protocols, and space. So that will be helpful as we sort of advocate for things forward. Next slide. So big things around legislative advocacy. It is almost that time of year. So a big issue that we worked for over the past year and a half was maternal child health. we have the Maryland Population Health Improvement Strategy, which is something that we're doing with the Centers for Medicaid and MCH. And so there's two goals already, which are diabetes and asthma. And so we really worked hard to get MCH to be the third goal for Maryland's Population Health Improvement Strategy. And this is really, really important because a lot of the focus has been on adults around this. And so this will really help focus a lot of the efforts on this population health improvement strategy on pediatrics. And as pediatricians, we all know how important population health is. So we're really, really excited about that. There's going to be an MCH committee at the Maryland Department of Health. And so this is going to be really important work. And then, of course, we have our lobbyist, PM Kastmeyer, who is just amazing. And we have been working with her to prep for our legislative season. And we actually have weekly calls with her on Tuesday nights, starting in January throughout the whole legislative session. And so talking about, what things we need to support, what things we need to, put out opposition towards. And I know telehealth and telehealth reimbursement is going to be a high focus area. Next slide. So finally, some new initiatives that we're very excited about. So we have Improving Child Health Services, which is the Prankster Children's Initiative with the Maryland Family Network. And the goal of that is going to be to improve collaboration between early childhood services and pediatricians. It's really looking at sort of increasing communication between like infants and toddlers and that sector. Then we also have a family engagement grant that we are just getting going with, and that is really focused on engaging family and youth representation in the chapter. And then finally, we are super excited that we have created a committee to achieve anti-racism, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we are so fabulously lucky in Maryland because we have both Drs. Maria Trent and Dr. Jacqueline Duget, and Dr. Duget has agreed to be our chair. And really, we are working on multiple goals there, including implicit bias and racism training, advocacy legislative initiatives, and then really importantly, diversity in the pipeline to pediatrics. So we are super excited about that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lenore. Great work coming out of Maryland. We're going to keep it rolling here, folks, because we have Chip teed up. So, Lenore?
Yeah, so hi, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I'm Lenore Jarvis. I'm the president of the DC chapter of the AAP. Next slide, please. We have 425 members. Our current president-elect is Nia Bodrick, and our past president is Dr. Ankur Shah. We are super excited to announce that we have the national incoming AAP president, Dr. Lee Beers, as one of our DC AAP members. And I hope that I'm not speaking on her behalf, but I think that she calls the DC AAP chapter her home. She'll start her national presidency in January, and we are so proud and excited for her. We also have Dr. Joe Wright, who's a longstanding DC chapter member who is serving on the AAP National Board and is encouraging all DC, Maryland, and Virginia folks to actually apply for several national committees that are currently having openings, that the positions are posted and due in February. So if you have any interest in being a national representative, please feel free to look at those position openings and apply before February. Similar to the Maryland chapter, I just feel like there's always so much advocacy happening. That's certainly the case in the current climate. We have been doing quite a bit with COVID, including chapter chats. We had the opportunity to speak at Mayor Bowser's Maternal and Infant Health Summit, specifically on COVID and the vulnerabilities that children face in COVID. We have been working hand in hand with several of our school health partners to make sure that when schools return to in-person learning, that the students and teachers and families feel safe, and that they do so in conjunction with some pediatric input and buy-in, and that similarly the school leaders can tell the pediatricians what they need us to do. One area of collaboration has been talking about students with special needs. In conjunction with school health, immunizations has been a problem in the district. We noticed early in COVID that our immunization rates had dropped. And so we've had a strong immunization task force that's been working to make sure that we have our children vaccinated in the district during COVID. And they will try to have some input as we get a COVID vaccination, trying to figure out what that looks like at this time. We also have been doing a kind of hand-in-hand advocacy push with the DC Council to allow minors in the district, likely ages 12 and up, to have a say without parental consent about whether or not to be immunized. Lastly, we continue our Salazar grant this year. That's Text for Lead and some lead initiatives within Children's National and several of our community sites, and that's testing for lead. I was told to keep it very brief, so I will just say that our next board meeting is January 14th, and we have that on Thursdays from 6 to 8 p.m. Please feel free to join. We have several of our members. If you live or work in DC, you are welcome to join, or if you just have a very big interest in DC, you're welcome to join. We are always having kind of advocacy initiatives similar to Maryland and probably Virginia, leading from breastfeeding to COVID to school health, immunizations, adolescent health, probably you name it. And so we're very excited, and we're happy to see you at our DC AAP meetings. Thank you.
Thanks, Lenore. And batting cleanup for the award-winning Virginia chapter, Dr. Michael Martin.
Thanks, Mark. And you probably, some of you may have already seen it. Suzanne Powers was actually in the Q&A making that announcement as well, and I'm really proud of our chapter of 1,300 members. Suzanne Powers, if you don't know, she is your rep in Northern Virginia. She's also the co-chair of the Peds Council, who's advocating for payments for COVID testing. We've had issues with DMAS with that, as well as administration of vaccines. So they're working hard in the Peds Council, and your representative in Northern Virginia is working hard on that. Next slide, please. So as one politician said, COVID, COVID, COVID. So we've all been busy doing this. It's going to be there for a while. We have regional email groups we've established to help pediatricians collaborate, share resources, and discuss local patterns they're seeing with it. It's helped us mobilize and deliver PPE to over 60 practices throughout Virginia and gather data. Early on, when we didn't know symptoms, we were able to gather data about that and the mental health issues it's creating. If you have not already signed up, you can do that online on our website, or you can reach out directly to me, but I would encourage you doing that. You do not have to be a member of the chapter. We do encourage it, but you don't have to be a member to be a part of those email groups. The chapter has also produced over 10 webinars on COVID, and we have an active YouTube channel to host this content, so take a look. The Virginia chapter has representation at a number of critical committees and task force groups, including the COVID Vaccine Advisory Committee, which I serve on, advocating for distribution in the outpatient setting and to pediatrics as well. The chapter has also formed a task force to help guide school reopening efforts across the state. Most recently, with the help of cardiology and sports medicine specialists in our state, we just recently published online a new algorithm to guide pediatricians on safely returning athletes to sports after having a COVID infection. So again, these resources are on our webpage, virginiapediatrics.org. And if you go to the next page, please. And we're ecstatic to announce, this was big news, that the chapter and our partners were successful in advocating to re-secure funding to expand the Virginia Mental Health Access Program throughout the state. And obviously this is going to be needed most. I know I myself, and I'm sure many of you, even this week, have been dealing with more and more mental health issues. So we didn't get full funding the first year that we had secured in January, but they did reestablish half of it for the first year. and the full funding that had been agreed on in January for the second year. Next slide, please. And the Legislative Committee has been busy already meeting for our January virtual session. We're committed to continuing the success of Advocacy Day, which has always been a big event with usually 100+ people. It's where we update pediatricians on the legislative bills related to kids and teach attendees how to effectively communicate with legislators. It's going to be virtual this year. Save the date. We will be doing that part of it virtually, and we'll probably be scheduling meetings with the legislators throughout the course of January. But I would save that date. We are going to absolutely continue to do that, as it's been a success, and it will continue to be. Next slide. And so the AAP is a key stakeholder in a newly formed immunization coalition, Immunize VA. We are working closely with VDH and the coalition to improve VIS, or the Virginia Immunization Information System, and are now in the scheduling stage of having a national ID expert speak with a number of our institutions, including Inova and Neighborhood Health in our area, to improve flu vaccine adoption, as well as teach on how to deal with vaccine hesitancy. Next slide. But there's a lot more that we've been doing, thanks to our board. Our Vice President, Chris Powell, is overseeing a grant to help practices effectively screen for social determinants of health and link families with the needed community resources. And we're helping to expand that program with VDH throughout other parts of the state. We're not just committed to helping kids, but to our members. And we just formed, Riva Kamat formed a physician wellness committee, which has already met once and is actively planning activities for our pediatricians in the state at a time we obviously need it. Next slide, please. All right, so here's my call to all you out there sitting watching. We need you to take some actions too and help us out. We are a volunteer organization, and there's a lot of different ways you can do this. One, if you're not a member, become a member. You can go on our website, virginiapediatrics.org, and become a chapter member. If you're a national member, it doesn't automatically make you a member of the chapter, and you have to have that box clicked when you do it. So we encourage you to do that. You can donate to our political action committee. Even $10, $20 makes a big difference. This is how we get some amount of ability to influence legislators and get time to meet with them. Super important for the successes that we've had. You can join a committee. You can become a champion if there's an issue that you don't think we're covering well, but you're passionate about. We can certainly make a place for you on the board to help champion that issue. And then lastly, as mentioned, advocacy is a huge avenue for our chapter, and we've been very successful there, as VMAP is evidence to. You can join us on our Advocacy Day on January 21st. We'll also push materials out to help you advocate at the local level with your own legislators about the issues that are going to be coming up with the legislative session in January. And next slide. Last, this is the website I keep talking about. It's virginiapediatrics.org. All of the stuff, there's nothing that I talked about that's not there. We've put a lot of time and effort into putting that together for you. If there's something you're not finding or you have questions, you can also reach out to me directly at my email, and that's there as well. And thank you, Mark, for having us and supporting the chapters, and everyone for doing the great work you're doing.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Dr. Martin. We do have one question about the Virginia AAP chapter. How many members are there?
Just Mike.
So
Dr. Martin.
We're 1,300 members right now and growing. So I'm proud to say we actually have grown in the last year. So that's been awesome. It's a larger number than I've seen since I've been on the board.
So I want to thank all the chapters and the chapter leadership for their leadership and their advocacy and championing issues for our pediatric practices, our children, families, and communities. Just remarkable work. So please participate, please support them. We're all in this together. And with that, we're going to transition to the rest of our program.